Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's CX Quick Tips. And it is February 23rd, 2021, and we're here again for our weekly at 105, remember 105, every single Tuesday, where we have different topics and experts. Now, last week I was actually broadcasting by myself because I had something a little bit controversial that ruffled some feathers, and I don't want to put anybody on the spotlight. But however, I think my guest today is going to do that. Adrian Swinscoe is here with me today because we're going to talk about what does punk music got to do with CX, or the customer experience. Adrian, welcome.
Hey Jim, how you doing? Great to be here. It sounds like you got a radio show like CX Tips 105 FM.
Yes,
coming at you live.
You know, it's funny that you say that. When I was in operations, sometimes things would just get dull and boring, and so we would get on the phones and we would have radio voice contests when we were helping customers. Hello, this is so-and-so. How can I help you today? And we would actually rate each other's performance.
And that in of itself, you know what? That would be just a great way of doing something, a little thing, right? Which is a little bit more punk, right? Something that dares to be different. You're like, you know what? Have a competition who can put on the happiest voice, who can do the best radio announcer sort of thing. You're coming live to you today from CX Tips 105 FM. How can I help you, sir?
We used to have a lot of good fun, and it was nothing by which it detracted from the brand.
No,
it did not, undermine the service delivery that we were doing. What it enabled was a type of engagement that really you can't get any other way.
yeah, allow people to bring the best versions of themselves to work, man. And like, if people choose to want to live and work in a position of service, then let them serve.
That's a great point. So I want to ask the question again because I want your definition, because you wrote a book back in 2017 called Punk CX, right? So what does Punk CX got to do with CX?
Well, okay. So the short version is that I'm a frustrated guy. I always want kind of things to be better. And I was in the pub with a friend of mine, Oshin, in 2017 in December, kind of cold winter's night, and we were talking about the state of CX. Numbers of pints of Guinness was quaffed. And in a moment of frustration and what drunks might call a moment of clarity, I went, I wish people would do something a bit more punk with CX, because there's all this kind of investment, enthusiasm, and energy and activity, but not a lot of significant improvement. And I was like, yeah, wish we'd do something a bit more punk. Now I'm a fan of punk music, and so that just kind of really sat with me. Now, I probably forgot that, probably something to do with the Guinness, but then it popped back into my head in the summer of 2018, and I thought about punk music, where it came from a bit more. Then it struck me that punk came about as a radical sort of reaction or almost departure from progressive rock in the 1970s. Now, progressive rock, whilst it was popular, was also accused of being overly elaborate, self-indulgent, all obsessed with its own technicalities, like how many notes you could play on your guitar, how many synthesizers you could play at the same time. And punk exploded out the back of that, because punk was basically kind of saying, look, you don't have to have a PhD in music to be a musician, to be in a band. Anybody can pick up a guitar, write some lyrics, kind of form a band, and just kind of have a go. So it's DIY, democratic, dare to be different. And it was very much about heart and emotion, about connecting with people, very much a movement. And I looked at those two things and I was like, oh, that's interesting. This is like, we could make an argument that says the CX space is looking a lot like the prog rock space did in the 1970s. Overly codified, certified benchmark framework, yeah, all this kind of like stuff, right? And it's more interested in itself than its constituents, right? So it's losing sight of the outcomes it's trying to drive. And so I thought, well, I wonder what a punk version of CX would look like if that's the case. And so that was the hypothesis. And so I thought, well, I'm going to write this book. Looks a bit like this, a bit like a fanzine sort of thing. It's designed, all full color designs. It's inspired by albums. It's, rather than having chapters, it has tracks. So it's like short titles, pithy lyrics, just like I call it a visual slap in the face for a customer experience. It's not a framework, it's not a method, it's not a model. It's just an incitement to do better work sort of thing. Because a bit like, people are waiting, right? Customers, employees, people in communities, we're waiting for better outcomes. And it's on us, the service and experience kind of like community, to deliver that. We have a responsibility to do it. And it's about punching through the sort of the mundane and the banal and the overly engineered sort of like stuff just to produce better outcomes. And so that's what the punk thing's all about. It's just like, come on, people, pull up your socks and get stuck in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you and I connected and talked a little bit before we started recording here, and we had to actually stop that because it started going so good. And we started talking about the book, which was released, in 19, and you talked about how the origins of it came. But I would really like to get your insights and understanding of what would the 2021 revisions be for Punk CX.
Well, so there's probably a lot, and actually I'm toying with the idea when I get time to try and come out with a volume 2, or sort of the newly discovered archive kind of like materials, kind of like blah, something like that. I don't know how it's going to work out, because there's all this sort of other stuff that's coming. Because what it turned out is the book turned out to be, even though it was born out of frustration from me, it seemed to be right on the very prescient and almost right in the zeitgeist through necessity for what happened in 2020. I just get stuff done, right? And so I remember getting an email from a friend in the height of the first wave of the pandemic in April, who said, it's amazing to see how much Punk CX is going on, things getting done in weeks and days rather than months and years. And so I guess the revision kind of for 2020, the big revision for 2020 would be do more, go faster, kind of like, learn more, kind of like lean into your kind of customers in whichever way you can to really understand what's important to them. And just, just get shit done.
I mean, I think those are the two words that are the most important. Right there is that there's speed. There's speed. You do it quickly. I mean, speed and get it done. It's the concepts that have to happen, and we were forced to do that, like you said. And I've had people even tell me that we hardly had anybody remote, and then in 48 hours everybody was remote. Well, Sure. Good. What else do we need to modify? Because those problems that your customers were going through for the past 3 years, stop those too.
Yeah, no, I think so. And the other things that have kind of emerged, I think, is there's all these different sort of things that are kind of emerging. One of the biggest things for me is how people in leadership positions, whether they are frontline supervisory positions, middle management, all the way up to executives, have to create the space to understand what's going on. It always strikes me when we were in a normal environment, i.e. kind of mostly on site, when people were talking about back-to-back meetings. Well, that's almost seems to get exacerbated now, and everybody's in back-to-back meetings, kind of like running over late to kind of like the next Zoom call or the Hangout, whatever. And it makes me think, it's like, when do people actually get space, one, to do work, and two, to really think and consider what's kind of going on? So everybody's kind of reacting. Now, the Punk thing to do, I think, is to actually kind of think about, well, what can I do to create that space? And the thing that I think people need to do, what leaders need to do, is need to take back control of their time and saying no to things, and almost start to kind of arbitrarily say, I'm going to cancel 20 or 30% of all the meetings I have every week on a continuous basis, because I need to clear out that space to create the headspace to be able to properly understand what's kind of going on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had myself on mute. I'd like to jump on and add on, is because of probably 60% that you need to whack, because there's two things that you need to do. One is what you're talking about, because I need to do a better job of, having my creative thinking time to be more innovative. And the other thing is I need to develop my people, right? And if I'm not doing that, I mean, all of it else puts me right back in. It puts me right back into the 80% or the 10 meetings and only have room for 8.
Guess what? You end up chasing your tail.
Absolutely. Right? So we've only got a few seconds left before our time runs out, because remember, we commit to 10 minutes or less on the CX Quick Tips. Is that in the book you highlight a quote about punk music, and I have it here. It says, it states that punk music is not the answer. That is up to you. What does that really mean?
Well, so it means it's like going, look, we're in this space, whether you call it service or you call it experience, we're in this space. We're committed to producing kind of better outcomes for people. So own it. take responsibility for it, take ownership for it, and realize that none of this stuff is going to happen if you don't do something differently. And it requires you to push, to be vulnerable, to take risks, to try kind of like new things, because it's on you. I mean, you have to lead, and when you lead and you try and do things, you give your people permission to do different things kind of too. So it starts with you. Get moving, get on it. No ifs, no buts. Carry on.
I love it. Adrian Swinscoe, thanks for joining us today. How do the CX Igniters, how do they get in touch with you?
Just look me up, Adrian Swinscoe. That's Swinscoe. In any kind of major search engine, probably Google, and you'll find me kind of pretty much first thing, top of the list.
And he's also one of our contributors at CX Global Media, so make sure you join him here as well. Adrian Swinscoe, thanks for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Cheers, Jim. Thank you.